There is a land beyond the mountains of memory, older than the sun and swifter than shadow, where time does not pass but lingers like smoke. In that place, where roots whisper secrets to the soil and rivers carry songs older than speech, stories live longer than people. They are not written in ink or carved in stone but breathe in the wind, riding from tongue to tongue, heart to heart, shaping themselves anew each time they are told. This is not a tale written by scribes or sung by bards in golden halls. This is the kind of tale that trembles on the edge of firelight, waiting to be spoken. It begins with death. Or it should have. There was once a girl born beneath the blood moon in the village of Droswin, nestled between the howling woods and the mountains that remember. Her cry came sharp and strange, piercing the night like a blade splitting silk. The midwives shivered. The stars hid behind clouds. An owl flew in and died on the hearthstone. They named her Ayira, though names held little meaning in that place. What mattered more were omens, and Ayira was an omen wrapped in flesh. The day she was born, her mother died. Not in the usual way. There was no blood, no struggle, no desperate final breath. She simply closed her eyes and vanished, leaving only her cloak behind. They say her soul was pulled into the wind. They say she whispered something no one could hear. They say a lot of things in Droswin. But what they never said aloud was this: Ayira's birth was a trade. Life for life. And they feared what they had received. The king, a stern man more wedded to prophecy than people, was told by the court seer that his daughter would bring either glory or ruin to the realm. Nothing in between. He wanted a son. He wanted certainty. But fate had given him a daughter and a riddle. So he shut her away, wrapped her in silks, placed her in a cold tower room with a nursemaid who never smiled. He thought perhaps if he kept her quiet, fate would forget her. But fate is not so easily fooled. Ayira grew like wild ivy, silent but persistent. She spoke to crows and sang to stones. She never wept, not even when she fell from the tower stairs and cracked her lip open on the marble floor. She does not cry, said the nursemaid to the steward. She listens. And indeed Ayira listened. To the walls, the wind, the spaces between words. Even at 5 years old, she understood that the world around her was built on fear. Fear of her, fear of the prophecy, fear of what lay in her eyes, which flickered gold in candlelight. By the time she was 10, her father had remarried. The new queen was a woman from the south, veiled and beautiful, with a voice like cool honey and eyes that never looked directly at Ayira. She brought warmth to the court and ice to the child's world. The servants were dismissed. The nursemaid sent away. Ayira was given a new tutor, a new chamber, a new life shaped by silence. The queen never struck her. She didn't need to. Her kindness was colder than cruelty, a sweetness that stung. She called Ayira Little Thorn, with a smile that never reached her soul. Still Ayira endured. She was not docile nor defiant, she simply watched. Waited. Her dreams were full of fire and forests and voices that called her by names she didn't know. Sometimes she woke with dirt on her hands. Once, her sheets were covered in frost. Another time they were soaked in blood, though she had no wounds. The maids whispered of witch blood. The queen ordered new bedding and locked the windows. The king said nothing. But you must understand, stories do not grow from silence alone. They need a spark. A break in the rhythm. And that spark came in the form of betrayal. It began as many things do, with a whisper. A whisper in the wind. The kind that twists through keyholes and creeps under doorways, curling into ears while sleepers dream. The wind carried warnings, yes, but also promises. Promises of power, of vengeance, of becoming. Ayira heard it one night as she stood barefoot on the balcony, eyes cast to the moon. They will try, it said, brushing her cheek like a lover. But they will fail. And when they fail, you will rise. She didn't know what it meant. Not then. Not yet. But something deep inside her stirred, not fear but something older. Something waiting. That winter the queen began to change. Her eyes grew sharper, her questions more pointed. She began to ask the seer about death, about curses, about old magics buried beneath the palace. She asked the cook about poisons. She asked the blacksmith about cages. She never said Ayira's name, but everyone knew. The first attempt was subtle, a plate of berries that tasted of smoke. Ayira fed them to a crow perched on her sill. It died before it hit the ground. The second was crueler, a trip to the river under the guise of celebration. The ice cracked beneath Ayira's feet with suspicious ease. She fell through, but something pulled her up. Something with fur and eyes like dying stars. The third was fire. A training accident in the Hall of Blades. Her robes caught flame and the guards barred the door. But the flames licked at her skin without burning, and when she screamed, the torches went out. Each failure awakened something more. The whispers grew louder. The wind followed her, playful and protective. Mirrors shattered when she stared too long. Doors unlocked when she merely wished. The queen grew frantic. The king grew silent. And Ayira, she smiled. Because by now she understood. This was not about survival. This was about transformation. Rebirth does not come gently. It comes through rupture, the tearing of old skin, the shattering of old truths. Ayira was not the girl they feared. She was what came after fear. What followed silence. What bloomed in betrayal. The tale they tried to write for her, of death, submission, silence, had been rejected by the wind itself. She was no longer merely a daughter, a threat, a prophecy. She was becoming a force. In the land beyond time, where stories live longer than people, such girls are rare. They do not grow in palaces. They are forged in flame, born in shadows, raised by whispers and watched by wolves. They are not loved, not at first. But they are remembered. Oh yes, they are remembered. You may think this is a tale of revenge. It is not. You may think this is a tale of magic. Not quite. This is a tale of becoming. Of fury mistaken for fragility. Of silence mistaken for surrender. Of a girl whose death was written, and rewritten, by her own hand. So sit close, dear listener. Lean into the wind. For Ayira's tale is not one you read, it is one you survive. And it has only just begun. Before Ayira had a name, she had a fate. The seers gathered the night her mother labored, summoned by dreams they could not ignore and omens they could not dismiss. Ravens gathered on rooftops. Wells turned cloudy. A fox screamed beneath the palace window and would not be silenced. There were whispers among the elders, of a child not born of flesh alone but of prophecy. A girl whose breath would bend the wind, whose footsteps would crack the earth, whose gaze would reveal what kingdoms worked so hard to bury. And then Ayira came. Not with a wail but with a soundless gasp. The midwives paused, expecting death. Instead her eyes opened, clear, cold and far too knowing. She stared at them with the weight of generations. The light above her flickered, dimmed and flared again. Outside, thunder rolled though no clouds passed. Her mother, Queen Rihanna, lay still beneath the silken sheets, her face strangely serene. Her lips were parted as if she had spoken one last truth no one heard. Her hands remained folded on her belly, her skin untouched by the agony of childbirth. The nurses moved to help her sit up to take her child, but she did not move. Rihanna had died not in pain but in silence. There was no explanation. No blood, no rupture, no final scream. One moment she had breathed, and the next she had vanished from within herself, as though something had claimed her the instant her daughter took her first breath. The king, when summoned, stood at the foot of the bed and looked at the child with a clenched jaw. He did not weep for his wife. He did not touch his daughter. He simply turned and said, "Burn the linens, and lock the tower room." That was Ayira's welcome into the world, a cradle wrapped in frost, a kingdom draped in tension. The seers returned the next day but they did not speak in riddles. They spoke plainly for they were afraid. "This child will bring either ruin or salvation," said the eldest, her eyes milk-white and unblinking. "She is a storm veiled in skin. Where she walks the land will choose. Glory or chaos. No middle path." The king's advisors argued for years about what that meant. Some wished her dead. Others demanded she be raised in the temple, among the sisters of the silent flame. But the king, rigid, practical, obsessed with control, chose containment over banishment. Ayira was to be raised within the walls of the palace, but apart. Fed, clothed, educated, but hidden. And so the tower became her world. The tower was old, part of the palace yet separate, a crooked spine of stone wrapped in ivy and silence. It had once been used to store records, the forgotten stories of kings long since dust. Now it became home to a girl who was more myth than maiden. She was cared for by old servants with tired eyes and stricter tongues. They never looked her in the eyes for long. They fed her well enough, kept her clean, taught her letters, songs, the old history, but none ever offered her warmth. They feared touching her skin as if contact would ignite something. And Ayira, though still a child, understood that her presence was tolerated only because it was required. There was no love for her within those walls. Only duty. When she was 5, her father stopped visiting altogether. She had met him perhaps a dozen times before that, brief, formal audiences where she was made to stand stiffly in a new gown while he asked 2 or 3 questions and left before she could answer. He never called her by name. Never once touched her hair or smiled. To him she was a symbol of loss. A weight that had crushed his hopes for a son and taken his beloved wife. So when he remarried, the world beyond Ayira's tower changed. The new queen, Lady Virel of the southern shores, came with a parade of silk and saffron. She was beautiful in the way that blades are beautiful, gleaming, precise, dangerous. Her words were sweet, but her eyes sharp. To the court she brought elegance and softness. To Ayira she brought exile. It began with subtle shifts. The servants assigned to Ayira were dismissed. Her books removed. Her walks in the garden cancelled. Her meals reduced to thin broth and stale bread. No reason was given. Only the queen's smile, warm and tight, and a single command: the girl needs discipline. She has been coddled. At 7, Ayira was forbidden from singing. At 8 she was denied mirrors. At 9 she was ordered not to speak unless spoken to. She is odd, the queen would say in public, her voice laced with concern. She stares too long. Dreams too loudly. The child frightens the younger maids. I only wish to help her become more manageable. And the court, eager to please their elegant new queen, nodded and murmured approval. No one asked how the girl felt. No one asked what she saw when she stared too long at the moon, or why she spoke to the birds. No one asked about the frost that sometimes grew on her fingertips in sleep. They preferred not to know. And yet Ayira did not break. Even as she was shut away, ignored, starved of affection, she bloomed, not in the way the queen feared, but in ways the queen could not understand. She found solace where the palace could not reach, in cracks and shadows and whispers of forgotten magic. Vines crept up her window ledge, offering blossoms in secret. Owls came to roost on her sill, their wide eyes patient and knowing. Ants built their tiny worlds along her floorboards, and she fed them crumbs and watched how they moved in perfect rhythm. She listened to the stones and the wind and the murmur of rain against glass. Nature, that ancient mother, raised her in the queen's place. Where human love was absent, the earth itself stepped in. The trees near the tower leaned in closer. The wind changed direction when she cried. Once, when she cut her hand on a shard of broken plate, a warm light pulsed from her palm, and the wound closed without pain. She didn't understand it. She didn't question it. It was simply part of her. Loneliness was her only companion, but it did not hollow her. It sharpened her. She learned to watch without being seen. To feel what others hid behind their words. To move without making sound. She became a creature of twilight, not quite night, not quite day, born of stillness, strengthened by isolation. But even shadows cannot hide forever. When Ayira turned 10, the queen ordered that she be brought to the royal feast, if only to display her obedience. She must be seen, Virel said. The people forget she exists. Let them see what their future chaos or glory looks like. Ayira was dressed in pale gray, the color of ash. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was bound tightly, painfully, pulled back from her face so that her strange golden eyes were impossible to ignore. The nobles stared. Some with pity. Some with fascination. Some with fear. Ayira did not speak. She did not eat. She sat straight and silent, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the queen. Virel raised a goblet and toasted her stepdaughter. To Ayira, she said, her smile thin. May she find her place, far from danger and even farther from power. Some laughed politely. Ayira said nothing. But the candles nearest her flickered as if caught in a sudden draft. No windows were open. That night, the queen ordered the locks on Ayira's room changed. The girl was no longer to have access to the gardens or the library or the balconies. Her world shrank to 4 walls and a single shuttered window. Still the wind came. Still the ivy grew. Still the dreams found her. And in those dreams she was not a prisoner. She was not unwanted. She was not a child. She was fire. She was claw and wing and thunder. She walked through cities made of bone and forests with silver leaves. She heard voices call her name she did not yet know. You are not forgotten, they whispered. You are not weak. You are not hers. She would wake trembling, her heart full of something wild and sharp. Something ancient. Something waiting. Years passed and the world beyond the tower moved without her. The king grew quieter. The queen more powerful. The court prospered and tales of the strange girl in the tower faded to myth. But stories like seeds wait for the right season. And Ayira, the unwanted child, was growing. Not tame. Not safe. Not broken. Only hidden. For now. It began slowly as hatred often does, not with fire but with the flick of a glance, a curl of the lip, a silent question that festers in the mind. What if she cannot be controlled? The queen had tolerated Ayira's existence at first, treating her as one might a cursed heirloom, too dangerous to display, too risky to destroy outright. But children do not remain children forever. They grow. And Ayira was growing in ways Virel had not anticipated. By her 12th year, Ayira had shed her awkwardness like the skin of a molting serpent. Her limbs, once coltish and too long, had grown graceful. Her voice, soft but clear, carried like song through marble corridors. Her hair darkened into a rich shade of midnight, and her eyes, those eyes like sunstruck gold, burned with something that made even the oldest courtiers avert their gaze. And she smiled. She smiled at servants. At gardeners. At the quiet ones most had forgotten. She offered scraps of food to birds on the sill, whispered to the kitchen cats, remembered the names of everyone who had once shown her a sliver of kindness. Virel hated it. She hated the way Ayira's beauty was not the cultivated beauty of courtly polish, but something raw and ungovernable, like the bloom of a wild rose. She hated the way people began to speak of her again, not in fear but in wonder. Whispers moved through the palace halls like mist. Have you seen the girl from the tower? She speaks to the wind. The flowers open when she walks past. She smiled at my daughter and her fever broke the next day. But it wasn't just Ayira's face or her kindness that ignited the queen's loathing. It was the power. Subtle, unpredictable, ancient. The girl made no proclamations, cast no spells. And yet, things happened around her. Lamps flared without oil. Keys vanished and reappeared. Dreams came true, or didn't, and that was stranger still. She was magic unspoken, waiting to be claimed. And that terrified Virel more than anything. The queen had spent her life shaping her narrative. Her beauty, her charm, her perfect composure. These were weapons sharpened for control. But Ayira defied control simply by being. She did not try to impress. She did not need to. She simply was, and the world began to shift. So Virel did what all rulers do when faced with an uncontrollable force. She resolved to destroy it. The first attempt was crafted with elegance. A tray of ripe berries, glistening like rubies, delivered to Ayira's chambers on a silver plate. The servant was new, eyes too round, voice too flat. Ayira didn't touch the fruit. Not at first. Something in the air had changed, subtly but unmistakably. The wind that usually whispered through her window now coiled anxiously around her, rustling pages, tugging at her sleeves. She picked up a berry, held it to her nose. It smelled like smoke. Not the smoke of hearth fire, but something bitter, acrid. Wrong. She turned, and a sudden gust blew the berry from her hand. It tumbled across the floor and came to rest beneath the drape of her bed. That night, she dreamed of trees with mouths and teeth like stone. The next morning, she awoke to find the berry had rotted through the floorboards, leaving a black stain and a nest of dead insects. The servant who delivered the tray was gone. When she asked, no one had heard of him. Later that day, she opened her window. A dove sat waiting with a scrap of parchment tied to its leg. It read, "The forest sees. She will not win." Ayira didn't know who sent the message. But for the first time she felt something other than fear. She felt watched but protected. Not by the palace. By something older. The queen's second attempt came under the pretense of charity. A winter outing to deliver blankets to the village children. Virel insisted Ayira accompany her. A gesture of goodwill, she said, smiling too wide. Let them see your kindness. Ayira, ever silent in resistance, nodded. They traveled by sleigh, the roads icy and uncertain. Ayira sat beside the queen, wrapped in a thin cloak that offered little warmth. The wind howled around them as they neared the bend that overlooked the frozen river. Then without warning the sleigh lurched. One of the horses reared. The driver cried out, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. The sleigh tilted, skidded. Ayira's fingers reached for something, anything, but the queen's hand found her first and shoved. She fell, her body crashing through the brittle surface of the ice, plunged into darkness. Silence. Then, movement. Not her own. She felt warmth in the cold. Not heat from fire, but something alive, muscled and breathing and furred. She was lifted, not by ropes, not by men, but by jaws. Gentle, strong, unrelenting. When she woke, she was on the riverbank, wrapped in a pelt of wolf hide. No one was near. Her lips were blue, her breath shallow, but she lived. And beside her, a paw print, larger than any she had ever seen, imprinted in the snow. The queen was frantic when she returned. Or pretended to be. Ayira, she exclaimed, voice a performance of worry. The ice broke too soon, we thought you were lost. Ayira looked into her eyes and said nothing. That night, frost covered the queen's mirror. The palace's hearths refused to burn for 3 days. But it was the third attempt that changed everything. Fire. It came during the moon festival, when the sky was thick with paper lanterns and children danced in the courtyards. Ayira had been told to stay in her room, for her safety. She obeyed, watching the lights drift upward through the small window carved into her tower wall. She smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. They rose quickly, unnaturally so, licking up the stairwell, devouring the old wood with frightening speed. Her door was locked. Her windows barred. There was no escape. She pressed her hand to the glass. It burned. The heat rose in waves, curling around her like a suffocating snake. But she did not scream. She sat in the center of the room and closed her eyes. And she dreamed. But not as she had before. In this dream the walls vanished. The fire danced but did not touch her. Figures moved in the smoke, tall, indistinct, cloaked in shadow and silver. They whispered in a language she didn't know but understood. "She is ready," said one. "She remembers," said another. "She is not what they think." Ayira opened her eyes. The room was gone. Or rather, she was gone. She stood outside the burning tower on the lawn near the stables. Her feet bare and scathed. Her hair untouched. Her dress whole. The fire consumed the top 3 floors before the guards managed to extinguish it. No one could explain how she had escaped. No one dared ask. Except the queen. She stormed into the king's hall the next morning, demanding answers. "Magic," she hissed. "She has powers, unnatural ones. She is dangerous. We must act before it is too late." The king as always remained cold and distant. "There is no proof." "She should not be allowed to grow unchecked," Betrayal insisted, eyes blazing. "We do not know what she is." But Ayira had heard enough. She stood at the threshold of the hall, her posture calm, her face unreadable. "I am what you made me," she said softly. "And what you fear you fed." Her voice echoed longer than it should have, resonating against the stone like a bell rung in a cave. She turned and left. The guards parted for her. None met her eyes. Something had awakened. It was not anger, not yet. It was awareness, recognition. A mirror lifting to reveal her reflection not as the girl they had tried to contain, but as something more. She no longer needed their rooms, their lessons, their approval. She had tasted fire and cold and poison and lived. But more than lived, changed. Now the wind didn't just whisper to her, it listened. Now the animals didn't just watch her, they bowed. Now her dreams weren't places she visited, they were places she created. Something old stirred within her. Something from the bones of the earth, the breath of the sky, the blood of the stars. A power that had been watching, waiting, sleeping beneath her skin. Not gifted. Inherited. Not summoned. Remembered. The queen did not try again. Because now she understood. Ayira could not be killed. Not by berries. Not by ice. Not by flame. All they had done was awaken the storm. The queen had failed 3 times. Poison, ice, and fire. Each had come close, but none had claimed Ayira. And yet Betrayal was patient. Hatred, she knew, worked best not in flames but in embers. Left to smolder, it would find new breath. So she shifted her strategy. She no longer pushed Ayira away, she drew her closer. She smiled more, praised more, softened her voice. And Ayira, tired from years of walls and watching, began to lower her guard. Just a little. It wasn't trust. Not fully. But a sliver of hope. Hope that maybe the queen had changed. That maybe the kingdom had grown weary of fearing her. That perhaps, finally, the whispers would quiet and she could step into the world without looking over her shoulder. The queen gave her a new servant, a boy not much older than Ayira, with quick hands, quiet feet, and a nervous laugh that made him seem harmless. His name was Talon. He brought her books from the forbidden library, apples from the garden, fresh quills even when none were requested. He spoke gently, never asked too many questions, and sometimes sang when he thought she was asleep. Ayira did not trust easily. But Talon's silence was a balm. And she was lonely. Even wildflowers leaned toward warmth. Over time they talked. Not about magic or prophecy but small things, cloud shapes, the taste of summer peaches, the stars that never sat still. She laughed with him. He listened without judgment. For a brief, bright moment she felt ordinary. Which made the betrayal all the deeper. It was Talon who suggested they leave the palace for a day. "There's a glen," he said, eyes lit like embers. "Just beyond the edge of the western wood. Untouched. Forgotten. You would love it." Ayira hesitated. She hadn't stepped beyond the outer gates in years. But something in his voice, a quiet longing, warmed her. One day she thought. One breath of freedom. They left at dawn, cloaked and silent, riding bareback on 2 lean horses through a side gate long abandoned. The guards, paid in coin and silence, pretended not to see. The queen, far behind in her throne of silk and secrets, watched from her window and did not smile. The woods greeted Ayira like an old friend. Trees leaned as she passed, their branches whispering stories. Moss cushioned her steps when she dismounted. Birds did not flee but circled close, curious. And Talon laughed beside her, pointing out mushrooms shaped like stars, stones carved by wind and time. They reached the glen by midday. It was everything he had promised, wild and blooming, golden with sun and shadow. Ayira knelt by a pool of still water and felt, for the first time in memory, peace. She never saw the blade. It entered just below her ribs, swift and deep. Her breath caught, not from pain but disbelief. She turned, eyes wide, mouth open, and saw Talon, his face blank, trembling. The dagger was still in his hand. Blood, her blood, on his shirt, his wrist, his lip. He started, then stopped. Ayira collapsed to her knees. The trees above swayed, though there was no wind. The water in the pool darkened. Talon knelt beside her, hands shaking. "I didn't want to," he whispered. "She said she'd kill my sister. Said, if I didn't do this." Ayira blinked slowly. Her body was numb. The world dulled. Even the pain felt far away. "You trusted me," he whispered. And she had. That was the worst of it. Talon fled, stumbling through the woods, leaving Ayira bleeding in the cursed glen. Because this glen, it was not ordinary. Long ago, it had been a burial site for warrior women of the old tribes, a place where songs were sung and blood and bones were offered to the earth. Over time it had been forgotten. But the land never forgets. Her blood soaked into the ground. The wind stopped. The light dimmed. And the trees began to hum. Low at first, like the murmur of thunder beyond the mountains. Then louder. A song made not with music but with memory. From the soil rose voices, hundreds, perhaps thousands, layered like roots. Voices of mothers, daughters, sisters, witches, warriors. Voices that had been drowned, silenced, betrayed. They did not mourn. They did not rage. They simply called. Called to her. Ayira's body lifted from the ground. Her blood did not fall. It hovered, suspended in the air like drops of ruby. The hum became a chant. And then, light. Not golden, not silver, but the color of ash at the heart of fire. It poured from the earth, wrapping her limbs, tracing the lines of her bones. Her skin cracked, not in pain but in revelation, as if something underneath had always been waiting to be seen. Her eyes opened. No longer gold. Now silver, shining with the weight of every promise ever broken. She stood. The wound in her side closed with no scar. Her dress melted into threads of wind and shadow. Her voice, when she spoke, made the leaves tremble. "No more," she said. And the glen answered, "No more." What Ayira had awakened was not a spell or a power that could be taught. It was a fury. The ancient feminine force of reckoning, buried deep in the bones of the world. Older than kings. Older than gods. Born not from hatred but from violation. Not vengeance for the sake of rage, but for restoration. Balance. Memory. She did not become the fury. She remembered that she had always been part of it. It lived in her veins, her breath, her very name. The queen had tried to burn her, drown her, poison her, and now betray her through trust. But each attempt had only sharpened what was hidden. In the silence after awakening, Ayira felt her heartbeat stretch beyond her body. She could feel the wolves of the north hunting in the snow. The roots of the trees pressing deeper into the soil. The screams of forgotten women echoing in the mountains. All of it, hers. The forest opened for her. Where she walked, flowers bloomed. Trees bowed. Shadows parted. She returned to the palace 3 days later. Barefoot. Alone. The guards who saw her dropped their weapons. The queen, upon hearing of Ayira's return, sealed her doors and lit every candle she owned. She called for priests, sorcerers, even begged the seer who once warned of Ayira's birth. None came. Because word had spread. The girl who could not be killed had walked into the cursed woods and emerged not only alive, but changed. She had silver eyes. She no longer moved like a girl. She moved like a storm held in flesh. She passed through the halls with a silence so absolute it swallowed sound. Servants fell to their knees. Doors opened without touch. Mirrors cracked. Paint peeled from walls. In the throne room the king rose to speak. But Ayira looked at him, just looked, and he sat back down trembling. She did not speak of betrayal. She did not weep. But her voice, when it returned, was no longer only her own. It carried with it the weight of every woman buried beneath palace stones. Every girl forgotten. every promise broken. Her words shattered lies. Literally. When the queen stood and said, "She has bewitched you all," the chandelier above her cracked and crashed to the floor. When the bishop muttered, "This is unholy," the symbols on his robes burned away. And when the king said, "She was always destined to bring ruin," Ayira whispered, "Not ruin, truth." And every lie spoken in the hall unraveled itself. The walls echoed with secrets never meant to be heard. The queen fled. But it was too late. Ayira did not chase her. She had no need to. She had become something that would be remembered in every stone, every tree, every heartbeat of the kingdom. Not a girl. Not a witch. Not even a queen. A fury. And her eyes saw not just what was, but what had been stolen, twisted, buried. She would not scream. She would not burn down the palace in rage. She would let the truth do it for her. They said she vanished after that night in the throne room, the girl with silver eyes and a voice that cracked truth open like a skull. One moment she was standing before the court like prophecy made flesh, and the next she was gone. No trail. No farewell. No witness brave enough to claim they saw her leave. Just the lingering heat of something ancient, and a kingdom that dared not speak her name aloud. But Ayira did not disappear. She became shadow. She walked away from the palace not as a daughter, not as a prisoner, not as a fury seeking vengeance, but as a storm learning to move without thunder. For the kingdom had broken her once, and in doing so, taught her that she could not fix what was rotten from within. The palace walls were not her battlefield. The war was elsewhere, in the villages, in the silence of the oppressed, in the blood-stained hands of men who slept easily in warm beds while children starved in alleys. So she walked. She wore no crown, carried no blade, made no proclamations. She walked like the night walks, quiet, inevitable. Her presence was a question people didn't know how to answer. Some said she came barefoot and glowing. Others swore she was cloaked in smoke, faceless. Some saw her only in dreams. But what united every whisper, every telling was this: wherever she went, something changed. In the border towns where nobles took coin from peasants under false laws, she appeared in the local ledger room, and when the mayor opened the ledgers the next morning, every name was gone except his. Next to it, written in a language no scholar could decipher, was a single phrase: "Remember what you owe." He fled that same day. The townsfolk found his vaults unlocked, his stolen wealth stacked in the square. They wept. They feasted. They painted her eyes on the gates. In the mines of the east, where children labored from sunup to moonrise for breadcrumbs and threats, a fire started in the tunnels. But no one burned. Only the iron melted, gates, chains, locks, all gone by morning. The guards fled barefoot. The overseer's tongue was found nailed to his office door. And the children? They walked out, blinking into daylight, chanting her name like a song half remembered. In the north, where the slave traders gathered once each month beneath a red banner, their tents were found shredded to ribbons. Their horses vanished. Their records ash. The buyers who returned to the city spoke in broken fragments, trembling. One man gouged out his own eyes. Another swore he saw every sin he had ever committed walking toward him in Ayira's face. She never announced her arrival. No fires lit in her honor. No temples built. But the people began to mark her path nonetheless. In one village they planted silver-leaf trees in circles. In another they carved her name in stone and buried it beneath their thresholds. In the deep woods, witches began to wear her likeness in the ink of their skin, calling her She Who Remembers. She moved like wind through a world choking on its own secrets. She did not govern or preach, she simply revealed. Wherever she passed, lies lost their teeth. Husbands confessed to hidden cruelties. Priests dropped their gilded masks. Merchants returned goods they had stolen decades before. No one knew how she did it. Some said her voice carried the truth like poison, that when she looked at you, you saw yourself unmasked and it broke something inside. Others said she didn't need to speak at all. Her silence was a mirror, a reminder, a reckoning. Children were drawn to her. They called her the Smoke Lady and followed her barefoot. She never stayed long. Just long enough to whisper one true thing into their ears, something no one else could have known. A name, a memory, a promise. Then she was gone. Legends grew. Some called her a ghost, a vengeance spirit too strong to die. Others said she had died and what walked now was her soul, fused with something older and greater. Some said she was no longer a woman at all, but a god learning how to wear human skin. It didn't matter. What mattered was this: cruelty no longer went unseen. She hunted it with silence, exposed it with truth, and left justice in her wake like flowers blooming through ash. And always, the rumors reached the palace. At first they were dismissed. "She's dead," the queen snapped. "Or mad. Whatever she is, she's finished." But the queen's voice faltered the first time a shipment of gold never arrived and the captain swore he'd seen a girl in the water walking atop the waves. His crew had fled. The gold, he claimed, melted into the ocean like butter in flame. "Madness," the queen whispered, fingers shaking. The second rumor came from a lord in the western hills who refused to pay his taxes, claiming the Fury would burn his crops if he did. When soldiers arrived to arrest him, they found his estate empty. The land around it blackened in perfect circles, nothing left but ash. In the center of the scorched field stood a statue, her likeness carved from bone-white stone, eyes silvered with real metal. The queen stopped sleeping after that. By the third rumor, her court had changed. Ministers trembled. Advisors resigned. The high priest retired to the mountains with no explanation. Her dreams became crowded with fire and wolves and voices that chanted Ayira's name with every breath. She forbade mention of her stepdaughter in court. Anyone who whispered the name Ayira was sent to the dungeons, or worse. The queen lit candles to gods she had once mocked. She sacrificed doves and poured wine into the dirt. Nothing helped. Because Ayira was not coming for her. Not yet. But the truth was, it crept through the cracks in the palace walls. Through the servants who remembered a girl with a shy smile. Through the guards who had once seen silver eyes in the dark. Through the maids who now prayed not to gods but to the wind. Even the king, aged, quiet, almost spectral now, felt it. He no longer ruled. He sat on his throne like a shadow draped in velvet, waiting for something. He never spoke of Ayira. But he had her name carved on a wooden medallion he wore hidden beneath his robes. Not from love. From fear. Because even he understood, she had become a story stronger than bloodline, stronger than steel. And stories like hers did not fade. They grew teeth. In the south, where drought had turned the rivers to dust, an old woman swore she saw Ayira standing on the ridge above her village. That night, rain fell for the first time in 7 years. In the east, a girl nearly stoned to death for stealing bread saw a figure pull her from the mob. When she turned, no one was there. But the bread was still in her hands. And no one dared lift a stone again. In the center of the kingdom, a child with a cleft lip spoke perfectly for the first time after dreaming of a silver-eyed woman kissing her forehead. Everywhere she moved like myth, just out of reach, yet impossible to ignore. The queen began to rot from within. Not visibly, not at first. But her beauty cracked. Her laughter soured. Her reflection in the mirror grew unfamiliar, warped. Her court thinned. Her allies vanished. Her influence frayed like fabric worn too thin. And still, no sign of Ayira at the gates. Because Ayira had no need for gates. She was already inside. In their walls. In their whispers. In their dreams. She had become the storm they once tried to drown. Now she drifted from village to village, flame flickering behind her ribs, not seeking revenge, but justice. Not seeking power, but truth. And every lie she touched? It burned. She returned not with an army, not with banners or war drums, but in silence and shadow. Cloaked in the skin of an ordinary traveler, Ayira crossed the threshold of the kingdom she was born to, now riddled with rot. No one recognized her, not the guards at the border gate, not the stable hands she once passed as a child, not the merchants who once watched her from the corners of the court. Time and truth had reshaped her face, softened her stance, altered the air around her. The girl they feared had grown into something they had no name for. The land recognized her though. The trees leaned closer when she passed. The stones beneath her feet hummed. Crows circled and called her by their own songs. She had left a child of fury. She returned an embodiment of it, contained, tempered, clear. And the kingdom had changed too. Virel's rule still held by title, but the land itself was sick under her grasp. Crops withered. Rivers ran shallow. Children were born with silence behind their eyes. The people no longer cheered at the palace gates. They whispered. They lit candles for a woman no longer seen. They prayed, not for the queen's blessing but for her absence. The queen stayed hidden behind veils and locked doors. Her courtiers had dwindled to sycophants too frightened to leave and too hollow to matter. Mirrors in the palace shattered without warning. Fires refused to stay lit. The tapestries faded to gray. Even the stone of the throne itself had cracked, small hairline fractures that deepened by the day. She had poured wine, slaughtered birds, summoned every old god still listening, but nothing answered. Her beauty, once ageless, had become brittle. Her voice, once honey-sweet, now rasped like rust. The spell she had cast over the court withered with every breath Ayira drew closer. On the first night of her return, Ayira walked the market square. Children followed her. Not because they knew who she was, but because they knew what she was. She knelt, whispered a name into a child's ear, and his fever broke within moments. An old woman sobbed and offered her a ribbon. Ayira tied it around her wrist and smiled. She did not say she was back. She didn't need to. By dawn, the queen had heard the whispers. "She's here," her advisor stammered. "In the city." Betrayal said nothing. Just stood in her mirrorless room, breathing too quickly, too loudly, her hands trembling around a cold goblet of wine she could not taste. "She won't come here," she muttered to herself. She wouldn't dare. But Ayira had already stepped into the palace. The guards let her pass. Some bowed. Some wept. One fell to his knees and said, "I remember you." She placed a hand on his shoulder and kept walking. She wore no crown. No jewels. Her dress was plain. Her feet bare. Yet she moved as though the building itself was built around her, like it belonged to her bones, her breath. When she reached the throne room, the great doors creaked open without touch. The chamber was near empty, half-lit, half-forgotten. The queen stood at its center, wrapped in violet and gold, a crown too heavy for her trembling frame. Her skin was pale and taut. Her eyes, once sharp as blades, were rimmed in red. "Ayira," she said, tasting the name like poison. "You've come to destroy me." Ayira said nothing. Her eyes, still silver as moonlit steel, took in the room, the woman, the lie of the crown. "You think you've won?" Betrayal spat. "You think because you parade around in rags and play savior to peasants that you've undone everything I've built?" Still Ayira remained silent. The queen stepped forward, her voice rising. "I am queen of this land. You are a mistake, a prophecy that should have ended before it began. I offered mercy once. You refused it." Ayira blinked slowly. "You offered control," she said softly. "Not mercy." That voice, it struck Betrayal like a slap. She staggered back. "I kept this kingdom alive," the queen hissed. "I held back the chaos they said you'd bring." "You are the chaos," Ayira said. The wind in the throne room stirred. "You killed my mother." Betrayal froze. "You poisoned the land." The wind rose. "You tried to destroy me not because I was evil, but because I was yours to fear." And with each word, the palace trembled. Betrayal screamed and raised her hands. From her sleeves, sparks flew. A spell of desperation, twisted, old, powerful. The air rippled. The torches flared. She screamed an incantation, her voice a jagged thing made of terror and dust. Light gathered around her palms, dark violet and roiling with smoke. She aimed it at Ayira's chest. "Die." The word cracked like thunder. The spell surged forward. And shattered. Before it could reach Ayira, it fractured into 1,000 points of light, rebounded, and wrapped itself around the queen like a noose made of glass. She choked. "No, no, this isn't." Ayira didn't move. Didn't flinch. "You summoned the truth," she said. "It came for you." The queen screamed but no sound came. Her voice turned to dust. Her beauty peeled. Her glamour faded. The spell she had spent years feeding devoured her in a breath. She collapsed to her knees. And there, in the very hall where she had first named Ayira a threat, the queen of the kingdom unraveled. Not by fire. Not by blade. By the truth she could no longer escape. When Ayira turned to leave, the doors opened again without a sound. Outside, the people waited, not to crown her, not to worship her, but to walk beside her. Because the reckoning was not the end. It was the beginning. The palace lay quiet, but the sky did not. As Ayira stepped beyond the ruined throne room, the winds howled like wolves returned to ancient woods. The earth shifted beneath her bare feet, not in tremble but in breath, as if the very land had been holding itself still for too long, waiting for this moment. Behind her, the queen's final cry faded into nothingness, swallowed by the truth she had feared her entire life. But Ayira's work was not yet done. Justice, though fierce, was not whole without restoration. And she could feel it, an echo deep in her bones, a chain older than palaces, older than kings. It was the curse, slithering through her bloodline like a whisper soaked in venom. The same curse that had haunted her mother and her grandmother before that. A silencing, a binding. Women in her line had always met strange ends. Mothers torn from children, daughters twisted into pawns or prey. They had been burned, broken, married off, erased. Not by coincidence. By design. And Ayira, though reborn, still carried that weight. The curse had a name, not just a consequence but a story forgotten by force. Long ago, in the first days of Kingdom and Bone, a woman called Sereth had walked the world with magic in her hands and fire in her voice. She had no king, no master, no husband. She healed who she pleased. She burned what she must. She was called the first witch. But the men of her time could not bear her power. So they cursed her, silenced her, buried her name under centuries of rewritten history, scattering her bloodline like seeds meant never to bloom. The curse was simple: none of Sereth's daughters shall rise. Should one dare, she will suffer. Should one flourish, she will fall. And for generations they had. Until Ayira. Now the curse strained around her ribs like an old chain growing brittle. She climbed the palace's highest tower, the one her stepmother once tried to burn her alive within, and stood beneath a storm-dark sky. Thunder growled low. Lightning laced the horizon. She closed her eyes and reached deep into the place inside her where the fury lived. Not a creature, not a ghost, but a memory carried in blood and voice. "Sereth," she whispered. The wind stilled. Ayira opened her mouth again, letting her voice rise like smoke, like dawn, like something holy. "Sereth of the flame. Sereth of the forgotten. Sereth who would not kneel. I remember you. I name you." The air shivered. A bolt of lightning cracked across the heavens, not jagged but clean like a blade cutting the sky. She took another breath. "You are not lost. You are not gone. You are mine." A second bolt struck the palace spire, and this time the light stayed, not fire but something purer, silver and gold and white, wrapping around the tower in a great spiral of storm. Down below the people gathered, silent. No one screamed. No one ran. They watched. For they could feel it too, the shift, the peeling back, the breath the world had been waiting to exhale. Ayira lifted both hands to the sky. "I break the chain," she said. A wind roared from the west, carrying ash and blossoms. "I burn the silence." The east answered, trees bending in reverence. "I name the pain." Thunder split the air like applause. "And I return it to those who built it." The storm bloomed above her, vast and terrible, not of rain but of memory. Faces flickered in the clouds, women long lost, eyes full of sorrow and fire. They wept, they smiled, they sang. Then all at once the tower exploded in a burst of light. Ash rained from the sky, not ruin but renewal. It landed soft upon rooftops, upon open hands, upon brows bowed in wonder. And the curse broke. Not with a scream, not with a crack, but with a sigh, a collective release from generations of stolen voices. The weight lifted from Ayira's chest like a bird finally remembering how to fly. In that moment she saw her mother's face in the wind, saw the shape of Sereth in the light. Neither asked for vengeance. Neither asked for crowns. Only truth. Only freedom. And Ayira had given them both. When the storm finally faded, the sky above was clearer than it had been in decades. The people stood in silence, hands stained with ash and grace. No one cheered. No one needed to. The curse had broken, and with it history was reborn.